Good morning. I just got a strange error message. So I see Dottie and Cassie, you're there. Can you do a live chat and let me know you can hear me talking? Because it's saying this isn't working right now, even though it looks like it's working. All right, I am watching. All right. Hmm. Good morning. Again, can anyone hear me talking? Okay, good, good. That was a bit of a delay. So how's everyone doing today? Excellent. Yeah, we'll be chatting a little more here in a bit. We may have a few more people than normal if people saw my email from about a half hour ago, and we'll address things there. So you had yes, coffee. Coffee makes everything better. So, yep, here at home today, and I'll say more about that in a bit. But Cassie doesn't drink it. I did not drink coffee until really after we had been married a few years. Never drank it growing up, never drank it in college. Even when I was in seminary, when I would be sent out to go do shut in visits with some of our older members, I'd get to the house, and these were three small rural congregations. So I'd go visit these farm families, and they'd invite me in and sit me down at the kitchen table. And it wasn't, Pastor, would you like some coffee? Because they called me pastor, even though I wasn't quite a pastor yet. They said, it wasn't, would you like some coffee? It's, Pastor, how do you like your coffee? And I said, black's fine. So I started drinking coffee black when I was on internship 1988, 89. Never drank it at home. And then when Carla fell in love with pumpkin spice lattes, when we were in our third congregation, I bought a cappuccino machine, and I've been chugging it ever since. But I like tea as well. However, I'm not a good Floridian. I do not like iced tea. Just makes me gag. Hot tea, any day. Green tea, black tea, Earl Grey, English style. Yep, no problem with that. But cold tea, I'm not a big fan of iced coffee either, for that matter. So, hey Marie, good to see you. How's life up in the tower? Lavender tea? Irish breakfast tea. I've probably had that. Yeah, I like chai. When I was in my first congregation, um, my shut-ins was a former Air Force officer who was a bomber pilot in World War II, and when I'd go visit Moose, uh, Moose would get tired out easily. He had had two legs amputated at the time we first started visiting because of diabetes, and but his wife Iris was a former model. They had met in London, where she was modeling when he was with, I believe, a Strategic Air Command at the time, and so she would make us a proper British tea, and that's where I learned to drink tea with cream. So, so that kind of led to chai because, as any good Londoner, she liked her curry too. So yeah. Oh, let's see, 9:05. We're plugging right along. So let's see. And good morning, Mary. Looks like we're in for another sunny, scorching day. Oh, that's right, Marie. You're home. Was Georgia a good visit? Did you have a nice time? Was it any cooler at least? I know back in Ohio and talking with family and friends up there, it's as hot up there as it is here. It's perfect corn growing weather. It is a heat index of 100, and I remember when we lived in our last house, we had a field literally right behind our backyard, and it alternated between soybeans and corn. And listening to corn in the wind, or listening to the corn on a really hot day, and you could literally see from day to day, watch the corn grow. It was just, but you needed those hot days and good rain to make that happen. Uh, Unlike my tomato plants, back when we first started out with these broadcasts, when I was out in the courtyard, I had two tomato plants, and they did really well for a while. Then they stopped producing tomatoes, so I moved them into the backyard, hoping maybe they needed better pollination, and they just aren't doing diddly now. Now my basil plant, that's 4 feet tall, and I've got lots of jalapeno peppers and thyme, and so that's doing well. Any of you growing any veggies? I'll probably go get some new tomato plants and see if I can get it restarted. Yeah, having the opportunity to grant herbs, I've got rosemary growing out in the backyard. When we first moved in, we had a big rosemary bush, and it accidentally got torn out. So I've started regrowing a new one, and we got a huge tarragon patch that's just loaded with tarragon. But yeah. Well, this morning for devotions, since I'm here and my devotional book is back at St. John, uh, back in the office, I thought I'd just pick up with where we left off in Mark's Gospel and just keep moving ahead on that and do two sections of it, and we'll go from there. So, the Lord be with you, and also with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, on this day, we thank you for the gift of your Son, who walked on the water, who calmed the storms, who healed the sick, and guided and taught his disciples. Be with us in our time together. Renew us, strengthen us, protect us, and inspire us. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, if you actually have your Bibles out, want to follow along, we are still in Mark chapter 6, and we did the feeding of the 5,000 on Tuesday. So we're going to pick up in chapter 6, verse 45, and just take it through the end. So 45 through 56, with the first section of this is Jesus walking on the water in the storm. So we'll start here in verse 45. Immediately, which, as I mentioned before, is Mark's favorite word. Everything is done immediately. Jesus is a man of action. So immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up to the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was out in the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass them by, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Have no fear." And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, or the miracle of the loaves, the feeding of the 5,000, but their hearts were hardened. And when they had crossed over, they came to the land at Gennesaret and moored there on the shore. And when they got out of the boat, immediately the people recognized Jesus and ran about the whole neighborhood and began to bring sick people on their pallets to any place where they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and besought him that he might touch even the fringe of his garment. And as many who touched it were made well. All right, let's talk a little bit about this portion. Mm. The feeding of the 5,000. The one thing that happens throughout Mark's gospel is the disciples are not too bright. They see what happens, but they don't understand what's happening. They don't understand what Jesus is doing. They don't understand what Jesus is saying. So, despite the explanation I gave last week, or I should not last week, Tuesday, 2 days ago, of the Moses feeding the people in the wilderness, the 12 baskets of leftovers, a loaf and fishes, they don't get it. So it doesn't become apparent until they're out in the lake, and they had to have some questions. Jesus is staying behind, everyone else is taking off in the boats. They're going to the other side of the lake. Jesus isn't going to be walking all the way around, so he must be renting a water taxi or something rather than going with them. And then in the middle of the night, as they are fighting the waves, fighting the wind, and if you've ever been in a sailboat, um, you the way you get a sailboat to go forward against the wind is a process called tacking, which is a zigzag pattern that you do, and between your rudder and the sail and the angle, you can start going that direction. But it takes a really long time because you can't sail straight. It's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And the wind was so strong and the waves were strong that they just weren't, you know, getting a whole lot closer. It was very painfully slow in getting there. And then they look up and they see Jesus walking on the water. Again, this is an image that is seen in all of the gospels. And again, it's to make you think of the book of Genesis. God commands the chaos of the waters to be still and brings creation out of that. So when they see Jesus walking on the water, human beings can't do that. Maybe ghosts can do that. The only person who can order around water is God. And so they are terrified because obviously there's something far greater than any human being at work in what's going on. And then Jesus tells them not to be afraid. And I mean, picture this. You are bobbing up and down in a boat, and you see Jesus walking up and down the waves as though they're just rolling hills. Gets to the side of your boat, which is doing all this, and then just calmly gets in, and the waves stop. And then they're able to make it to shore, and they don't understand what's going on. The one thing that's consistent throughout the Gospels is Jesus is continually doing miracles to show the people and the disciples that his title, Son of God, is pointing to the reality that he is God. Doctrine of the incarnation, God in human form. He is God in the midst of his people. So the human version of the Ark of the Covenant, or yeah. So you have that image of God in the midst of his people. And the thing is, the Jewish leaders understand exactly what he's saying. They're smarter than the disciples. So, but they don't understand yet what Jesus is doing. We're only in chapter 6, and we're not quite halfway. But the disciples are still trying to figure this out. But that Jesus can calm the storms is a very comforting image when life is out of control, and that certainly is the intent here for the disciples to understand that Jesus is not simply a great teacher; he can command creation itself, and only God can do that. Then, when they land there in Gennesaret, that is Jesus is also the great healer in Mark's gospel. Healing is an important part of Jesus' ministry, healing the sick and casting out demons. So that is a constant part of his ministry. And as this says, wherever he goes, the sick are constantly brought, and even just touching the hem of his robe leads to healing. So um, the crowds understand this. They're watching. Oh, good morning, Suzanne. Good to see you. So Jesus' ministry is growing exponentially, but what his disciples are seeing is greater than what the crowd is seeing. The crowd understands he is a teacher, he is a miracle worker. By what the disciples see out on the lake, they understand they need to start understanding that Jesus is greater than Moses, Elijah, John the Baptist. Jesus is God. So, so there you go. Chapter 7, which we will pick up on next week, is Jesus talks about ceremonial law. In the Jewish tradition, there's a whole bunch of different laws that one should follow regarding eating, drinking, cleaning, serving dishes, and so forth. And Jesus has a few choice comments for those who make these ritual laws more important than who the laws serve, namely God. So there you go, Mark chapter 6. We've made our way through it. So I pulled out my college Bible that I keep here. Okay, well, let me start with this question then, real quick, for those of you who are here. Um, if you haven't seen the email from this morning that came out about 8:30, look for it when we're done here, but I will give you the summary. Uh, Namely, we found Kit, Jennifer, and I found out yesterday that last week we were exposed to someone who has COVID-19. They found out and got their test. They had a fast test yesterday. Wait, today's Thursday. On Tuesday, that they were positive for COVID-19, and they were in the office, and we saw them, talk with them. It was very brief. They weren't in the office more than 5 minutes, and you know there was no hugging or anything like that involved. It was kind of hello, how you doing from our offices. But we have a policy that we established early on in all this, that knowing sooner or later someone with active COVID would come into the office, be around one of us, and we'd have to have an action plan for when that happens. So like most folks, it's you need to stay out of the building for 14 days and have no symptoms. Then after 14 days, you can come back or go get a test. And if you have a negative test, then you can come back. Well, when we found this out yesterday, we all called our doctors and spoke with them. They were not concerned, but I so hate this phrase. I really do. It's a running joke in the office. It just drives me batty. And it's one of my own personal pet peeves. It has to do with media folks. Is every now and then people in the media will come up with a phrase, and then every network uses it over and over again. Same phrase, and you just no. It's like someone handed out a cue card for everyone. But I will use it here. Out of an abundance of caution. Oh, that hurt just to say it. Out of abundance of caution, The three of us are staying home. We all went and got tested yesterday and found out that the 24 the same day result tests are worth more than gold. You cannot get them around Orlando right now unless you are a police officer or a firefighter, or perhaps an emergency room physician, surgeon, something. Pastors do not rate in that hierarchy. So we got tested yesterday, and it will be 10 to 12 days before we get our results. Which means the 14-day quarantine period, isolating from the church, um, will be Tuesday, long before um, our results come back. So what we are doing is the three of us are staying at home. The office is closed, at least as far as what we're doing. Um, Jacob Rivera went in and sprayed down the office just in case. Uh, None of us are having any symptoms whatsoever. And like I said, the doctors didn't even think going to get a test was necessary because the encounter was so brief. It was in the open space. It would have been different if we had all gone into Jennifer's office and talked in there for 10, 15 minutes. But they're not concerned for us. But if we're asking this of other folks, and this is going to be part of the policy, that when we do reopen, we're going to ask everyone, if you have been in contact with someone that has had COVID, and it's been less than 14 days you've been in contact with them, don't come to worship. It's the rule of thumb everyone's using. So we sat there in the office area, and I looked at Jennifer and she looked at me, and I said, I really would like to exempt us. And she said, I would too. And I said, I really can't, can I? And she said, no, you can't. So we're all home. We'll be back in the office Tuesday, provided, any of us, if we start to show symptoms, then we'll stay at home, and then we'll be talking to our doctors and see what happens with that. But at this point, our physicians aren't concerned for us. But Pastor Lee, Pastor Ron Lee, he'll be covering for me Sunday, and Kit was up to assist, so we'll have someone else filling in as worship assistant for Sunday. So Sunday worship will happen, and that's all good. Our spouses are all fine. Again, none of us are showing symptoms, so why should they? But this is just, as we're moving ahead toward reopening, and that's going to happen. I mean, with Disney reopening this week, with schools, potentially reopening, it looks like August 10th. Sooner or later, someone with COVID was going to come into the building. We would have contact with them, and then we would have to respond accordingly. So, we'll see when we reopen. The numbers are still up, so it may not be quite the end of this month. It may be closer to, rather than opening when Disney reopens, we may reopen when the schools do. It's the tricky part of this, of putting everyone into even our large space with distancing. We'll do the best we can, but we have to be prepared, because whenever, any of us who go out, whether you've gone out for dinner or you go to Publix or Winn-Dixie to go grocery shopping, guaranteed you've been past someone who was asymptomatic and had it. And it's just whether timing and space, didn't work in your favor and you pick it up. The person who came visiting, they are fine. Their family's fine. This person and their spouse both have it, but been to the doctor, and they have cold symptoms, runny nose. They don't even have a cough, and they're already feeling better. So, but keep them in your prayers. It's kind of a scary, it's kind of a scary thing. In fact, I was talking with them this morning just to be sure they were okay because it's a member, and there was it was a little unnerving that you know here's here's basically cold and flu medicine. If you're feeling uncomfortable, take this. Otherwise, you're just going to weather it. And their comment was, you know, this is scary. Well, in talking with medical workers that I know, most have stopped watching the national news, um, and that was their advice to me. Don't watch it. Um, Watch the local news. You'll know what's happening here. And this is a virus that is not a death sentence. The older you are, the more serious consequences can happen. For most folks, they either don't know they have it, or if they do, it's cold symptoms. So we can all take a deep breath, listen to her doctor, listen to our doctors, and it's going to be okay. So your concern is much appreciated. We'll continue to be careful. It's something not to take lightly, um, and we will move ahead and we'll reopen when we reopen. Can't do this indefinitely. But for right now, with the transmission rate up so high, this is the right thing for us to do this weekend. Make sure we're all okay, and certainly don't want to spread it to the other people who are assisting with worship. Um, if for some reason I were, Kid or I were to turn out positive, but yeah, out of an abundance of caution, we'll stay home. So there you go. In a nutshell, where we're at, everything else is proceeding normally at St. John. Finance teams meeting tonight, and we've got the new budget in place, and I'm working on a stewardship appeal that you'll be receiving next week to talk about how your giving is making ministry happen. Um, Being part of a congregation is morphing into something different than what we've been used to. Uh, for many years, it's our attitude's been more that church is kind of like a club, and you have a membership, and with membership it has its privileges, and that means you get to attend worship, you get social events, occasionally we do some things to service events to help the community, your kids get a religious education, um, and then your financial support is kind of a pay as you go plan, unless you want a year long membership with unlimited benefits. That's kind of putting it crassly, but what we're at now is we're encountering each other this way and worshiping this way in a virtual sense. It really is shifting and making us think, what really is necessary, what's most important in being church, and understanding that ministry is not what happens in the building. Ministry is what you do, not as a member but as a disciple. So my role as pastor is not director of the country club, but more like the director of a gym. I am teaching you the discipline, the exercise of living like Jesus, so that you can exercise that out in your daily life, away from the building. So we're becoming much more, it's much more the emphasis that the church is the people and not the building. And so we're going to talk about that as far as how our stewardship of our finances and of our time equips us to serve. Um, how that is preparing our building to be reopened, because we just did the ceiling repainting. There's some things that we're looking at in digital ministry with how we've improved our video system and so forth for Sundays, and what more we can do, and what is the next step. What is church going to look like in the next year and beyond, of this blend of digital in the building and outside the building discipleship? It's intriguing. So that's my work for today, is to get that prepared so you can start to experience that, and challenge you to grow in your stewardship um, for the long term. So, all right, we have reached 9:30. I kind of said my little spiel for today. So, any questions that you folks have? Because clearly you've been listening very intently, because the live chat has not moved. The one thing I will say now and say again is, we are all fine. And I really have appreciated everyone's emails and support over recent weeks, and as we've kind of reinvented ourselves and been doing things in your support of myself and the staff. Um, yep, those who caught it, they have no idea when or where. It was a complete surprise. Um, but that's just kind of what happens. But they're, yeah, even after just a couple days now, they're feeling much better. Um, yeah, Suzanne, with you at the sheriff's department, I imagine. Do you have to get tested regularly, like every 2 weeks, because you're with the sheriff's office? Oh, in the test, it looks awful. It's not terribly comfortable, but it's not quite as bad as what you would think. Um, they I had the swab test, so they take a long stick about this long with like a Q-tip swab on the end, and they tell you to tip your head back, and then you can feel them slide it up your nose until it's somewhere back behind your eyeball and sticking into your brain, and then they twist it around a few times and pull it out, and then do the same on the other side. Um, it'll make your eyes water, but it's actually more ticklish than, it's not painful at all, but oh, it's yucky. So yeah, Suzanne, it's spreading, and I know there was my brother's home congregation down in Naples. They had reopened a couple weeks ago, and they've suspended worship again. Jennifer, I thought yours came out your ear. There you go. Yeah, it's not the most comfortable thing in the world, but there's far worse. That was really surprising, because CVS is supposed to be a site where you can get the same day tests, and they only book 2 3 days out, and they're out right now. So we couldn't get in there. Centricare was completely booked, couldn't get in there, and then hooray for Kit, she found a Paramount LabCorp um, lab out in Oviedo, actually not too far from Lutheran Village, that had walk-in. So it was funny. Kit went out there first, let us know that it was there, and by the Jennifer and I were in the parking lot together waiting, and we were in and out about 15 minutes. So that was a whole lot better than those 3-hour lines you see elsewhere for the same test. Temp checks daily. Yep. And that's the schools do that downstairs, and we've got a thermometer now, and but again, you can set the temperature off by being out in the sun. and overheated. And if you're asymptomatic, you aren't going to be running a fever anyways. But we do the best we can and try and be careful and protect everyone. So, oh yeah, it was easy in and out. So yeah, so Mark and Jacob were glad that they were out of the office at that day. All right. Well, I think we will call it a morning then, and I will get down to my stewardship work here. And got Bible reading time at noon, and then do tune in Sunday morning with Pastor Ron. Uh, and oh, hang on here. Didn't have my phone silenced. So, with that all being said, I would greatly appreciate that if you would let other people know that since you have seen me live and in person, to it's kind of scary to hear exposure and things like that. Again, no symptoms. Doctors are okay with where we all are at. It's just we're following our own policy and being careful, so we're all good. So why don't we close together with the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thanks for tuning in, and keep coming back.